I'm speaking with Stephen L. Moore, author of Uncommon Valor, the recon company that earned 5 Medals of Honor and included America's most decorated Green Beret. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
So first, tell me, how did you get into studying and writing a book on this subject?
Yeah, this subject kind of goes back to a family connection. My wife's uncle, my father-in-law's brother, we've known each other for 28, 29 years or so, and we've talked a lot about his service at family reunions and while we play golf and stuff like that. And just hearing how he went across the fence into enemy territory, often pursued by dogs or, hundreds of men after him as soon as he hit the ground. I just found it almost incredible, hard to believe these stories.
Mm-hmm.
And then finding out that it was classified for decades. We kind of joked about it. I'm like, yeah, one day I'm going to sit you down and we're going to talk about this, and we've got to write up some of your experiences. So it kind of came over a long period of time that I finally decided, it's time to do this.
Mm-hmm. So you've written a number of books, I think, correct?
Yeah, I've done a lot on Texas history and World War II history. This was really my first to get in-depth into the Vietnam War and the Special Forces.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of a learning curve for me, but highly exciting. Great people I got to meet along the way.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the book then.
Well, I'll call him Wilson, Uncle Wilson. George Wilson Hunt is his name. He invited me to come out to SOAR, the Special Operations, basically their reunion they have in Las Vegas every year.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of started there. Having interviewed him extensively, I wanted to go deeper and talk to the men that served with him over there in Special Forces and find out as much as I could, like I've done with other books. And so at the reunions, you have multi-days just to sit with these guys and interact with them and hear stories, in some cases people hadn't heard because it was being classified for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just incredible to hear this. In the end, I ended up interviewing more than 100 veterans, mainly Green Berets, but then also some of the pilots, the A-1 SPAD pilots, some of the Huey chopper pilots that inserted these guys on the missions and pulled them out.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to get as many perspectives as possible.
So how did you organize the book? Is it chronological or is it just story by story? How does it work?
Yeah, I kind of thought at first it might be a personal story of Wilson's time of coming into MACV-SOG and how he got in and when his missions were run. But then the more I looked into it, there was so many more fascinating stories at his forward operating base. It was called FOB-2 out of Kontum in Vietnam. But I learned that 5 different men had earned the Medal of Honor from this one small base. And then 8 other men had earned America's second highest military honor for the Army, which is the Distinguished Service Cross. And Wilson was there amongst some of the guys that earned it. And I figured let's back up a little bit and talk about how the base is formed, how it comes together, and then go forward through some of these incredible missions. So I kind of expanded my scope the more I learned about these guys.
Mm-hmm. So what years of the war does this cover?
It opens up in basically the spring of 1966,
mm-hmm.
and I go into the formation of SOG's Forward Operating Base 2 at Kontum, and I go through January of 1970.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a 3.5-year period roughly. And a lot of it's focused around Wilson's time, but then I go into what they call the Kontum 33, the so-called first bunch of guys, the Green Berets that came in there and opened up the space and got it up and running and built up the infrastructure,
mm-hmm.
Up through Doug Miller's Medal of Honor mission in January of 1970.
Mm-hmm. So, and what geographic region is this? And can you sort of, like on a map, where would this area be in Vietnam?
On a map, the area you're looking at is pretty close to where Laos and Cambodia come together in North Vietnam, up there in the upper quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
Just right near the upper tip of Cambodia. Someone would have to be looking at a map to see it, but I do include a map in the book. So basically, it was a short flight to a staging area or launch area called Dak To, and from there, helicopters could easily insert the teams into either Cambodia or Laos.
Mm-hmm.
And those operation areas changed over a period of time. Originally, in 1966 and 67, most of the areas of Special Forces operation were in Laos, and they were called Prairie Fire as the code name. It was originally Shouting Brass, and it became codenamed Prairie Fire. And then as they expanded into Cambodia, that was originally called Daniel Boone Operations by code name, later changed over to Salem House.
Mm-hmm.
So you were originally running either Shining Brass or Daniel Boone Operations, classified, of course, and if you were lost or killed in action across the fence, as they called it, it would be denied by America that we had any knowledge of what you were doing over there.
Mm-hmm.
So for decades, a lot of their missions reportedly took place somewhere in Vietnam, even though everybody running the missions knew that they were far across another country's border.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And is there a main theme that you explore in the book apart from what the title tells us? Are there any themes or issues that you sort of thread through the book?
Well, probably the first person to kind of break the news on SOG's existence was Major John Plaster, who was also a veteran that served at FOB-2, and he kind of gives credit to this base as being the most decorated unit of the Vietnam War. They were originally allotted up to 60 men, Green Berets, to run the base, but they were half that staff when they first got started. So I kind of try to follow the build-up of FOB-2 from just, the infrastructure, just the grassroots, to one of the most elite fighting units that was over there in Vietnam. Just really trying to give credit for what they accomplished. Their Black Ops missions, going across, infiltrating the Ho Chi Minh Trail, blowing up jeeps and convoys coming down or trucks down the trail there. I just kind of the buildup of this force, I guess you'd be, if you wanted to put a finger on it, and some very important missions along the way.
Mm-hmm. So were these individuals, were they trained as groups before they were inserted, or were they just trained maybe individually to as high extent as possible and then just kind of put together, piece by piece as guys rotate in and out?
Okay, yeah, most of them, there were some Navy SEALs, a small number that served through FOB-2, but the largest percentage of them were Green Berets. So they're already elite fighting men that have been trained. They usually have 2 or 3 military, specialties that they've trained in,
mm-hmm.
Demolition, code breaking, all kinds of stuff like that. But then they had to volunteer to go into SOG, not knowing exactly what it even was, and go through special briefings, and then be assigned to their bases. And once they got there, it was kind of an eye-opening experience for most of them that you're going to go in sterile, meaning no dog tags, no patches, no identifying marks on your weapons or your clothing as you go in, so that if you're killed, they can't possibly identify you as American. And they did get all kinds of special training at the base. They had their choice of special weapons, from handheld rocket launchers to experimental toys like jet-propelled handguns and things that were just kind of cutting edge. But they learned more under fire than anything else. I relate Wilson's first mission coming in and the choppers dropping them off, and now they have to run for cover and then regroup after the choppers had pulled away, and basically him losing his breath and hyperventilating just from the fear and the excitement.
Mm-hmm.
After a couple of missions, they're old hats at it, but they learned a lot of this under fire that was not traditional Army training.
Mm-hmm. So these soldiers, their mentality already is to go above and beyond, what is expected of them, just by personality and training and that sort of thing. The awards that they received, would you say that the standard under which they received these awards equaled like sort of the conventional forces, or were they, the guys who got their awards, were they above and beyond even their peers among special forces?
Yeah, I don't want to discount anything anybody else did, but in these cases you're talking what they called originally spike teams, became recon teams later in the nomenclature by 1968. A traditional group might be 3 Green Berets and 5 or so indigenous personnel, either Chinese Nungs or local tribesmen they call Montagnards, or the Green Berets refer to them as yards for short.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 Americans and usually 5 indigenous going in. The team leader, his code name is 1-0. His second in command is 1-1. And the third guy is known as the 1-2. 1-2 is usually carrying the radio. But long story short, to answer your question, when they're across enemy lines. Usually it's going to be hours, if not the next day, before they can be extracted. So the valor they displayed is usually running for their lives or fighting for their lives, sometimes for hours or days on end against superior enemy forces. And often these guys are badly wounded, sometimes mortally wounded, versus anybody else fighting with hundreds of men around them. They might have 3 to 5 men around them still alive, and they're having to shoot it out, fight for their lives, run through the jungle, try to signal choppers when it's available from a mountaintop, and get themselves extracted. And some of these guys, the most decorated guy I talk about is Bob Howard, and he stayed in the Army and retired as a colonel. He was wounded, I believe, 14 different times. 8 of those times he received the Purple Heart.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times they didn't bother to write the paperwork up to get the award pushed through because it didn't mean as much to these guys.
Mm-hmm.
He was one that would go right back, wounded or not, within a week or two. He's back on the front line. He came in originally as a supply sergeant at FOB2, but he was so gung-ho to get out and fight from his previous Army experience that he volunteered to go out with the teams and did what they call strap hanger missions, where you weren't formally assigned to the team, but you basically volunteered to go fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it was said of him by one of his comrades that, Bob, whenever we got into the worst of the fight, he would always run, but he was always running toward the enemy at all times. Whereas other people were trying to take cover and save their own skin, he would charge machine gun nests or go up against anything he needed to take it out.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of valor displayed that, again, not discounting anyone else's valor that earned a high medal, but when you're out there in the jungle surrounded by hundreds of men and there's only a few of you, it's a different kind of fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I asked the question because, in my mind, every one of them deserves an award of some type, but of course they're not going to do that. It's only, a select few who are going to get awards, the way it works out.
Yeah, Bob Howard was actually written up 3 different times while he was at FOB2 for the Medal of Honor, and any one of those was deserving from his, the standpoint of what he accomplished or his bravery. But the third time he finally got it, and that was on a mission, what they call a bright light mission, and that's where a recon team would go in to either try to recover a downed pilot, or in a lot of cases recover the body of either a downed pilot or a Green Beret team. They wanted to always bring their men back, dead or alive. If you went in on a bright light, it was guaranteed the enemy knew you were coming. They either had the body there or they had the person they were trying to capture. And you were going to face all kinds of artillery, all kinds of platoons of NVA, and you're going to go into a firefight from the moment you land until the moment you come out of there. And it was in one of those situations that Bob Howard finally earned the Medal of Honor after the third time of getting written up for it. He was badly wounded. Some of his indigenous teammates were badly wounded. He was knocked unconscious by a grenade, and when he wakes up, his comrades are being burned to death with flamethrowers, and one of the NVA is about to do the same to him. And I won't give away the whole thing, but his lieutenant is badly wounded, in fact mortally wounded, and Bob's mission is trying to get him out of there, as well as recover the body of the men they originally went in for. And in the process, the whole team is beat up, shot up, burned. It becomes quite an incredible ordeal, and he called it almost a miracle that he made it out of there.
Yeah. So, I noticed in the book description, it says it's not just Green Berets, and I think you mentioned this too. It's, there are also SEALs and Air Force Commandos. Are you able to touch on sort of the ratio of those forces, over the course of the 3.5-year period?
I do, and again, it's just a handful of Navy SEALs that operated from Khartoum, but I do want to acknowledge that they were there. It was primarily Green Berets that went through there, but I did want to touch on the air crews, the air support that took place there. I attended the 57th Assault Helicopter Company reunion a couple summers back as a guest of Rick Griffith. He was one of the Huey pilots that flew in 68 and 69. He was there Recon Team Maine was inserted in February of '68, and again, a tough mission, a big firefight that they're caught up in, a lot of wounded men, and as they go to extract the team, and this wasn't a one-time thing, it happened a lot, these choppers are under fire as they come in. Rick's chopper is shot down and blown down into the jungle. Zabatowski is on the chopper as it goes up. He comes down, he's got broken ribs, fractured vertebrae in his back. He's burned, he's cut by shrapnel. And he goes into the blazing chopper and pulls Rick out of it along with his co-pilot, John Cook. Both of these guys are terribly burned. And so now you've got your team on the ground, the down chopper with all of its crew injured and burned, and it just becomes one upon another, just trying to get all these people out of there. So Fred Zabatowski would get the Medal of Honor that day for saving the two pilots, pulling them out of the burned chopper, even though he was horribly burned in the process of doing so. And it goes on to talk about that fight. But getting to go with Rick Griffith and his guys to their reunion, I got to hear these stories, not just about Zab's mission, but about other ones and what they did and how they went in, willingly. I mean, they could abort the mission as a pilot if it was too hot, couldn't go in, couldn't land. And a lot of times they did go in and land under fire and try to pull those guys out. A lot of times they were successful. Sometimes their choppers were shot down in the process. But I tried to get other perspectives. And the interesting thing is listening to these guys at the reunions, some of the A1 SNAD pilots would talk about in their presentations before the SOG veterans, we just found it crazy that you guys are willingly on the ground in enemy territory, going in there, doing the things you're doing, sabotaging, collecting intelligence, while you're under pursuit the whole time. And in return, the SOG guys said, we thought you guys were nuts, coming in and landing those choppers or bringing in your planes at treetop level, trying to save our butts. So they finally, long after the war, got to meet each other and exchange their different points of view, which is pretty cool, seeing both sides of it like that.
Now, sorry if you might have mentioned this before, but were the teams inserted on the Vietnam side and then they walked over, or did the air crews fly over the fence, I guess, to use the term that you mentioned?
There were a little bit of both. There was one mission where Doug Miller's team walked into Cambodia from kind of a common area where they were doing a SLAM mission, where they would come in and seek, locate, annihilate, and monitor enemy resistance. But most of the time, the choppers would take them into the designated area. They would have a target area like India 9 or Hotel 9, and they would put them in on a mountaintop or a slash and burn area where the jungle had been blown away by some bombs. And there would be a plan, an operational plan, that you're going to be on the ground 2 days or 5 days and collect this kind of intelligence or attack this target, and we intend to take you out here. But what they would call, it was a cross-defense mission, meaning they were in Cambodia or in Laos, where they were not supposed to be officially by U.S. standards. So you had to be extracted by chopper. They would do it in the early days with what they called strings, basically ropes dropped out of the chopper. You hook in on a carabiner and get pulled up through the canopy. And a lot of times that meant if you're under fire, that chopper pilot's going to pull out faster than you hope. He might be pulling you at treetop level through that canopy, means you're slamming into trees and trunks of trees. Some of these guys suffer broken bones, getting knocked unconscious. A few of them in different cases were pulled off the ropes, the strings, if you would, as they're being dragged through the jungle. And once they get to altitude, they might have to fly 20, 30 miles back to a base. So at high altitude, you're far below freezing, so you land and you're covered in ice, you can't move, you're beat up, you're bloodied from being beat by the trees. So just ending a mission was almost as perilous as being on the ground in some cases.
Yeah. So does that mean the air crews and their helicopters had to be sort of sterilized as well when they went on missions?
Yeah, they might have some numbers or markings or some paintings that the squadron put on there, but they were careful about what they put on there. Those people over there, the North Vietnamese, and the people they're fighting, they knew well that it was Americans. I mean, by the types of planes that are coming in against them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, originally the recon men went in with old Swedish case submachine guns, kind of vintage World War II type weapons. You know, some of the ammunition's so old that it's almost, you know, got mold on it. It's been sitting around for so long.
Huh.
But they stepped up and evolved into the Colt, the CAR-15 machine gun. That was one of the favored weapons of the recon guys. And others kind of had their own pistols and different weapons or bowie knives or armament that they would carry with them in the field.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they were sterilized as much as could be, and the choppers taking them in were stripped down to a certain degree to get rid of, you know, the stars and bars, if you will, on the sides of the aircraft.
Mm-hmm. So let me talk about the resources you used. So you mentioned over 100 interviews that you did. What other materials did you gather to do the research?
Well, there's a couple of SOG historians that go to all the Special Forces reunions, Steve Sherman and Jason Hardy. They were great resources as far as helping me track down some of the veterans I wanted to talk to. One of the tough things about this was somebody talking about this mission or that mission, and we don't have a chronological sequence of actions and events. It's really hard to piece it all together, but working with Steve Sherman, I went through all the citations, the military decorations for all the MACV-SOG men, and I could look, you know, say February 7, 1968, and find all three of the men that got citations, and when you put them together, you know, the text is almost identical for what they were, you know, what they were doing, where they were. And you could piece together who was on the mission, go back, find one of these guys, and validate that, yes, he was there, this guy was with me. And some of it's documented to a certain degree in some after-action reports, but a lot of that was either destroyed or perhaps still remains tucked away somewhere in the archives.
Mm-hmm.
So you got a lot of the stories firsthand from the guys. There's a decent amount of MACV-SOG material that you can get your hands on, but it doesn't have as much of the names of the guys, unless there was an MIA or maybe a Medal of Honor mission where there was a lot of eyewitness accounts added into the file. A lot of digging, a lot of digging, and a lot of talking to the vets to get this stuff. But the military awards went a long way to help me piece together who was on which team during which period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And Jason Hardy was a huge resource. He's put together coffee table books on each of the teams. In fact, he's still putting them out.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets the information, the diaries, the notes, and the photos from the guys that were on each team. So he was a huge benefit allying with him.
Are there many, you know, the Library of Congress oral history records and that sort of thing? Did you use any of that? Is there any of that for these guys?
Not as many. There's probably a few in there now. There was one for Bob Howard. It was actually through the Pritzker Military Library in Chicago. I've been up there before. I've done a talk with them, and they have a very good collection of Medal of Honor material. So they've got a fair amount of resources. A few of these guys have written some books in the past 15 years or so. I mentioned John Plaster, another guy named John Stryker Meyer. His code name was Tilt. Tilt's written a couple of books on his experiences. I know there's another one coming out this fall from a colonel who's talking about some of the secret war over there. So little by little, there's more material coming out. But you know, the best thing you can do is take what's there and talk to the guys directly to try to get, you know, some supplemental information on what they did or where they were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, talking about the original Pontoon 33 and how that base got started. That's pretty much word of mouth, talking to the guys and even the base commanders that, you know, helped run that base. You know, I had the opportunity to talk to a couple of the earliest commanders of the base, and at Vegas at one of the reunions, I was actually fortunate enough to talk to Brigadier General Jack Singlaub, who was what they called the Chief SOG, basically the head of MACV-SOG for a couple of years over there.
Hmm.
He you know, sat still long enough to let me ask him questions for a little while. So very kind of an honor to meet a, you know, guy in his mid-90s as distinguished a warrior as he was.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of sources.
I'm sorry?
It's just a lot of different sources that I had to pull together to try to make this very readable, you know, the flow of it. So it you know, it's kind of a labor of love, making it understandable how it all came together.
how often did you have a situation where maybe you heard differing stories about a particular mission or issue that you had to reconcile? And I'm not asking for names or anything. I'm just curious how often that might have arisen.
It happens. With World War II books I've done, you get 2 or 3 guys on the same mission, and sometimes, in fairness to them, depending on where you were, your perspective, you didn't see the same thing the other guy saw. But to your point, there's some cases I run into in this book and even different books where what's on paper officially, through the military, looks good for a certain individual, but some of those on the ground will tell you off the record, that ain't the way that went down. Let me tell you what really happened. And you hear from another guy or two without them being present, following up with them later. It kind of goes along with what the guy's telling you. In some cases, that's understandable. You don't want to cause embarrassment or shame for someone's family, but sometimes someone gets different awards, and other people really contributed heavily that those there would say, this guy deserved more than he got. And I try to be fair with that. And present all sides without making one side look bad, but recognize those who maybe didn't get as much recognition in that year that they should have. If that makes sense. Yeah,
it does make sense. Did you get to handle or take a look at any objects or anything associated with this period or these missions? Any mementos or anything?
Mainly at the reunions, some of the guys will bring in things that are on display there. You can look at some of the weapons or knives or some of the material they carried with them in the field. Just sitting with them in person, you can see some of this. But some of the books that Jason's put together, there's pretty good collections of photos that officially they weren't supposed to be taking pictures and keeping them for themselves. But if they had not, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be as well documented as it is now in his books,
right?
Especially on the teams. So I've seen a little bit of that, but there wasn't a whole lot of. There were some mementos brought back that you took from North Vietnamese or someone across the fence. But a lot of times you're just running for your life to get the heck out of there and get that chopper back home.
Yeah. What part of the research, and I can kind of guess at this already, but what part of the research was most enjoyable?
For me, it's always talking to the guys in person. My uncle, sitting with him, we'd go through these missions. One of the big things the SOG guys wanted to do was capture live prisoners across the fence and bring them back. And Wilson had the chance to do that on 2 missions back-to-back in September of '68. And they called it prisoner snatch. If you could go in and snatch an enemy soldier and bring him back alive. You might stalk up on him and try to wound him, shoot him in the leg, and get him out of there. Well, as you can imagine, once you've winged an enemy soldier in their terrain, in their jungle, you're going to bring everybody around you down on you. So now the fight is on to get them out of there. And just hearing some of those stories of going in and getting one, and the intelligence they gathered, found out that there's an ammo dump and a big supply area there. Next day, his team is told, you're going right back in with the SLAM team, a big company-sized group, and we're going to hit that area and take it out. And it led to him taking another prisoner out with his team 2 days after the first. So that kind of stuff, you'll see that he's got, a silver star, and it briefly denotes a few things that happened in Vietnam. Well, it wasn't in Vietnam, and there's a lot more to it than just a couple of sentences on a citation. So that's the cool stuff, is sitting with these guys and hearing this just kind of wide-eyed, like, really? You did that and you guys made it out of there alive? Almost incredulous in some cases,
Yeah. So what was this question popped in my head. What was the age range of guys there? Because we're considering, junior guys all the way to the head of the MACV-SOG.
Yeah, if you're leading a recon team and you're, say, in your mid-30s, you're the old man. They call you Pappy or something like that. So a lot of these guys coming in, they could be just out of high school. They've gone through, advanced training, special forces, become a Green Beret, done the jumps, to get air qualified. And, 19, 20, 22 is probably an average age in there. The younger ones, a couple of them I talked about coming in, they're just, turning 18 as they come in. They're kind of the young pups. In fact, some of the older team leaders don't want to take the young guys out. I kind of talk about that in the early chapters.
Hmm.
And then they get seasoned, they get to get on a team, they get to go out in the field, and you could be an old man by the age 21 if you've gone out and run 10, 12 missions leading teams across the fence.
Mm-hmm.
They would try to go maybe 6 months at a time. But with the SOG missions on these recon teams, you could pretty much opt out at any time, no shame, just kind of tag yourself out and say, think I've run enough, let me get into something else, and there was no questions asked. They'll take you and put you on another duty, within Special Forces.
Mm-hmm.
Because they realize that there's a burnout factor. You see your guys getting killed or you're under fire in that extreme of a condition for that period of time. Some guys want to keep doing it for years. Other guys, there's a time when they say, I need to get out of this,
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't as many of them that stayed over there for multiple years, although some of them did.
Yeah, I could also see guys who maybe should get out, but are just so ultra motivated, that they maybe stay in. I don't want to say more than they should. That sounds negative, but where they just push it maybe past the limit.
Yeah, and there were times when a specialist fourth class, that ends up running a team or taking over a team because they've got a green first lieutenant they've dropped in that needs to get some experience, and he becomes more of a hazard for the team than he is a help.
Mm-hmm.
Just making stupid mistakes out there, not understanding what you do, how you do it. So some of them would run a mission or two and lose it and flip out, and then they were done. And they didn't want any more, and they were ready to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or a senior team leader would say, this guy's no good, I want him out, get him off my team. And those that were good wanted to go back as often as they could. Those that weren't as good, more often than not, they realized they weren't good enough to be out there, and some of them said, that's enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
But, one mistake out there could wipe out a whole team if you're not careful.
Yeah.
There were some entire SOG recon teams that were wiped out, a few that just disappeared. Some, our teams went back in and got the bodies or recovered them.
Wow.
But one mistake could take out everybody if you're not careful of what you're doing on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, that's pretty chilling to think about,
Yeah.
So,
imagine trying to sleep outdoors on the side of a mountain in enemy territory, and every stick or twig you hear snap in the night. Is that a patrol coming up on you, or is that just the wind or some wild animal walking through the jungle?
yeah.
I told my uncle, I was like, I don't know how you do that. I would not sleep for 5 days if I was in there for 5 days,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at this point, the guys are all past retirement age. Sounds like 68 to mid 90s.
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of them are in their 70s. Like my wife's uncle, Brigadier General Singlop is 96, 97, but he was a colonel at that time. So we're talking older. But in the 80s, for some of the guys that held rank, like Major or something like that, at the time of the 60s, probably 5 or 6 of them had passed since I started this project 2 or 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You interview World War II veterans, and they're going quickly. But
Mm-hmm.
the sad thing is now we're talking Vietnam. Even these guys are 70s, 80s. We're starting to lose them at a faster rate too. So
Yeah.
I like the eyewitness history. I love hearing it firsthand from the guys. But especially with World War II, my sources are getting thinner by the year.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you find that was most surprising in doing this?
Just the mentality that it took for these guys to go back in. Once they came back out, they just kind of wiped the slate clean and went and had drinks at the base bar, and they had a great amount of freedom. And I guess because of the nature of their warfare, they were very troublemaking, kind of playful kind of guys. Ripping off jeeps from other bases or taking food that didn't belong to them. Kind of a prideful thing to see what they could take, and that's probably old Army stuff all the way around. But
Right.
They're just characters.
Mm-hmm.
And you see them today at the reunion sitting around having their drinks and telling the tall tales. They're just as fun-loving and mischievous as they were back as 20-year-olds back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Just seeing the personal side of that was pretty interesting, pretty cool.
Yeah. What would you say was the most difficult part to research? Maybe some issue that you still don't have a handle on, or just maybe took a lot of time and energy to reach a conclusion on?
getting into some of the missions, even some of the Medal of Honor missions, there's a reluctance or a skepticism of, what's your point? What are you up to? And to kind of ease in and make friendship with some of the guys that were on these teams, and they realize, hey, you're there. You've got, I think being associated with one of the veterans that served with them helped me quite a bit, open some doors as not being a complete outsider, but when you go there and meet them in person with your relative, that helps. But they don't always want to go into the fine details of the missions because it's tough. I mean, so-and-so got the Medal of Honor, but he died in the process, and a lot of the other men died there. It wasn't a pretty scene. It was the fight of their life to get out of there. Some of these guys aren't as big on retelling those stories now. They're starting to be. Even with World War II vets, I heard a lot from the kids that it wasn't until they get to their 60s and 70s that they would go into all those fine details. And in some cases, never. But I think it takes a period of time for a lot of guys to talk to someone outside of their immediate core group of veterans about what they did, what they saw, and how terrible some of that fighting was over there.
Yeah, it seems like you almost also need like a personal introduction, like, hey, this guy is good, you can talk to him, that sort of thing.
It kind of helps you out. I've been talking with fighter pilots of World War II in the past few years, and if you know one, and you kind of, hey, I've been talking to so-and-so, it kind of opens it, it's like a green light. Oh, yeah, I've met him before, and we served together, versus just being completely out of the blue talking to him. Kind of the same thing with Special Forces. If you can mention, I've talked to these guys, and they talked highly of you, and, okay, well, yeah, I know him. Every little bit that you can do to kind of let them know that you're not just calling completely out of the blue helps out to ease their attention. One of them, I won't mention who he is, but someone I really wanted to talk to for a long time. The first time I got a hold of him, I was kind of told, he's not going to talk to you, he's not going to open up, he's a difficult guy. First conversation was basically, the SOG stuff we did is classified. Can't talk about it. I could get in trouble. We signed documents. And I tried to reassure him the decades have passed, the time has been by, there's books that have been written, there's reunions, it's okay. A couple months later, we finally kind of eased the tension, and I talked about certain missions and what they did, and when he realized I talked to this guy and this guy and this guy that were on the same mission, then the walls kind of came down, and he started talking more freely. But there's a certain reluctance. One, that they're going to get in trouble for talking about it, and two, they don't want to, and three, who are you to begin with, So you've got several levels of resistance to get past with some folks.
How often did it ever happen that maybe you met some of these guys' family members who maybe gave you some details and used that to, what would you do? Did that happen, and what would you do with that type of information if you got it?
Yeah, you're talking about the families. In one case, there's one of the men that's officially MIA. Now, those that were there know that he did not survive. If you read the chapter, you'll kind of hear from the other guys that were there. His wife, his widow, still clings to the hope that maybe he was alive for years as a POW. And you don't want to cast any doubts on that. But when the guys there say, these things happen, and here's why the fellow did not live, you don't want to hurt their feeling or their chances. But it gets tough to see a family go through that kind of agony. The one, I'd say, high point of this book was, I'm decent doing research, especially with the World War II and aviation stuff. And so when I talked to my Uncle Wilson about some of his missions, he talked about one of his bright light missions where he had to go in and look for a downed Sky Raider pilot in his plane. And he said, I've never been able to figure out who that guy was or what his name was, or if the family knew what happened to him. I said, oh, yeah, we'll figure that out, no problem. And he said, well, yeah, good luck with that. I've been trying for 48 years. And I put it on the back shelf, and later when it came to writing that chapter, I dug in, started going deep into it, and figured out the window of when the plane would have been lost, based on when Wilson had certain members on his team and a few other variables, and pretty quickly identified one plane, that's got to be it. And then looked around within a few months and kept coming back to, that's got to be it. Did a little research, and then reached out through a family site and found out more about The only thing we found out about Dad's plane was that some Army Special Forces guys went in, and all they found was some shards of metal and pieces of the plane with numbers and a burnt flight helmet. Well, and all the stories Wilson had told me, when they got there after being under fire and making it through the mountains, they found some pieces of the plane and peeled off the pieces that had numbers on it, and all they got was his burnt flight helmet, and it just matched perfectly. So we kind of hooked up with the family, a little nervous about would this stir up old wounds or pain to the family. But the son, David, was very welcoming. We had great talks about it, and it led to my uncle-in-law, Wilson Hunt, telling this story at one of the reunions with the Wolf Kyle kids, the whole family there, and they kind of finally got closure for, what really happened to Dad. He was not a POW. He did not survive the crash, and here's the guys that were there firsthand. They can tell us why. And it was emotional for the guys that were there, the families, and for Wilson, but a great experience to give that closure to some people on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the highlight of researching that book and helping to pull some people together at the end.
So we've talked. So I normally ask what emotionally moved you most in your research, but we've talked about a lot of emotional stuff. Was there anything? Did you find any funny stories? Anything that particularly was uplifting? Apart from the sacrifice and such is uplifting, but maybe something more on a humorous level. Did you come across that?
Oh yeah, there's plenty of that, and some of the guys are real characters. There was one 1-0 or team leader from Texas. He was an older fellow, late 30s. They called him Happy Webb. And some of these guys, they're going to do what they do, and they don't give a darn about protocol and what you're supposed to do. And so when you come back grimy, dirty, just worn out from days in the enemy's jungle, you get to sit down and do a debriefing with these intelligence officers. What was the grass like? How tall was the canopy? The bushes, the terrain, the soil, just page after page of details. And among the other things would be not enemy, but animals encountered over there. Some of the NVA would use elephants for patrol.
Oh, wow.
And for moving supplies. And so they would want to know about the elephants' droppings, the dung, the size, the moisture, the content, and on to where you're exhausted. You don't want to hear this. After one of these missions, Happy Webb took a plastic bucket over there, scooped up a big pile of elephant dung, and when they came back, he just dumped it right on the desk when it came to the point to talk about that, and he said, there you go, dig in and examine it yourself. Not too popular with the intelligence guys, but that was, for those guys, it was good humor. A lot of dark humor, just crazy things they did like that.
Yeah. So you say you have stories like that in the book?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, there's some good humor in there, and they had to do what they had to do. Whether it's drinking at the base bar and putting on crazy shows to letting off steam. One of their traditions became an old song about an old dog that dies and go to heaven called Old Blue, and they would sing that song and change some of the verses to insert the names of some of the guys that were killed from SOG on the missions.
Mm.
So after somebody else was lost, they'd pretty much get drunk at the bar that night, and somebody would start the Old Blue song, and it would lead to just this rousing chorus of adding the names of all the guys that they knew that had died along the way.
Mm-hmm.
That was uplifting, but it just kind of became a tradition. But they did what they had to do to blow off steam. Wilson had one of his teammates that would get drunk every night, and if they didn't have a mission the next day, and at the end of the night, they'd sign off on the radio, the Stars and Stripes, with the Star Spangled Banner, like at midnight.
Mm-hmm.
This guy would be so drunk he'd stand up and salute, and then take his pistol and just fire 3 or 4 shots through the roof. And so Wilson every morning would get him up, hungover as he was, and say, get up there and patch that roof, and the dead heat of the morning, and worst hangover possible. Just, to him it was funny, but it didn't attract his humor at night when the gun was being fired through the roof.
Yeah, that's
payback, I guess you'd call it.
What's that?
I guess just a little bit of payback is what he saw. He's like, I'll get you in the 0600 in the morning when you're feeling real good, put you on that hot roof.
So, do you know if did they have Vietnamese working on that base, or was it all just Americans?
They had a mixture of indigenous, some Vietnamese. In some cases, you would have a Vietnamese officer that would go out with you, or some of their men. The recon guys preferred the indigenous folks. They loved the Montagnards.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of similar to American, Native Americans here, Indian tribes, where you had different groups, different cultures, different languages.
Mm-hmm.
The Montagnard people were kind of the same way. They've been badly abused by the NBA, and they were more than willing to go over there and help kill and fight against them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were tough guys. And the Green Berets, I know, loved going out with them because of how tough they fought and how diligent they were.
Mm-hmm.
But there were South Vietnamese involvement, mixture of people added to the teams.
Did you hear any stories about anything they learned from the Montagnards? Any techniques or skills or something that they picked up?
Yeah, I mean, the folks that they lived there, they grew up there, so they could go through that jungle, and they were great trackers. They were great at maybe hearing or seeing something before some of the Green Berets picked it up. They'd be moving along in patrol, and one of them would just stop and just kind of freeze and maybe point, and one of the sergeants just looking at him like, "What do you see or hear that I don't?" But they knew not to question him, like something's that direction, let's just see what it is. So some of them had just this uncanny ability to recognize something's out of place on this trail or in this particular forest. So they were a tremendous asset, as far as local knowledge of the jungles and the mountains that they were fighting in.
Mm-hmm. So what do you hope the book will do?
Well, I hope some people will pick it up, read it, learn a little bit about what went on, and this secret war, this special war that went on. The sad thing for most of our Vietnam vets is they did not come back to the country with open arms as most of our World War II veterans did.
Mm-hmm.
Some were ridiculed or spit on or just treated poorly for being baby killers or all these terrible names that were thrown upon them by people who had no idea what they'd gone through over there in their service. So I hope that some people will recognize not just what Vietnam vets did, but especially this elite group, that they couldn't talk about it to their wives, their kids, their families for 25 to 30 years. And only in the last 20 years or so has it started coming out about what these folks did. And that's understandable with any special forces group, but being put in situations they were put in, they went above and beyond what a lot of soldiers experienced just on the ground in fights, because you're surrounded by your company or platoon. But when you're in there with 5, 6, 8 guys, surrounded by hundreds of men trying to kill you, that's a whole different thing. So I hope people appreciate what they did for our freedom and what they sacrificed for America.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them being wounded multiple times, sometimes picking up the Purple Heart, sometimes not even bothering to go through the paperwork that was required.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you speak to any difficulties you had either in finishing the book or getting it published, and how you overcame those?
Yeah, actually on this one I chose to go to Naval Institute Press. I'd done a couple books with them in the past, and there's kind of a formula that the larger publishers want to see. A very small group of people, one main story, one main conflict. And if I would have just stuck to Wilson Hunt, that would have been doable. But there were these other incredible Medal of Honor missions where I had insiders on each mission, personal info from them, that it was hard to say, let's just pick one of these and that's your book, that's your focus. And that's kind of the recommendation I had. And so I opted to back away and not go with one of the larger publishers, but go with one that I appreciate, one that I trust, that I'd used in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to Rick over there that runs the operation and said, here's the story, here's what I'm thinking, could we do it this way? And we tell all 5 of the Medal of Honor stories and give more about the base over a several year period. And he listened to the pitch and how it came together, and he said, yeah, we can do that. So this one I felt like, because of how many people I'd involved, it would be hard to take a third or half of my material and just throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do it the way that that should be done. And I was very happy that Naval Institute Press would allow me to put it out in that manner.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that people can read through it and appreciate that.
Okay.
Certainly, if I would have just done Fred Zabatowski or Doug Miller or Bob Howard, fascinating. Great stuff, incredible missions on their own. But the bigger picture, to me, is all these guys deserve some recognition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's your next writing project?
I am currently working on fighter aces in the Okinawa campaign, like the last big Pacific War campaign, taking on the Thunder Gods, the kamikazes. So I've been talking to some of the Marines that fought ashore, some of the destroyer sailormen that were on the ships that were hit by the kamikazes, and then a lot of the carrier veterans that were going up and making the attacks and trying to stop the rain of steel, as you call it, from coming down on their ships.
Mm-hmm.
And they're 96, 98 years old. I'm kind of scrambling on this project, and it may very well be my last World War II book where I can actually talk to people or look at them face to face that were part of it.
Yeah, it's a sad thought, but yeah, it's. Yep.
It's sad, but they're not getting any younger. I mean, I know one officer on one of the submarines I've written about. He's 101 now, but they're not going to be with us too much longer. So I enjoy catching history firsthand as much as I can. So keep my reporter going and talk to as many of them as I can in the next year, and hopefully put something together in the next year or two that ends up being readable.
So. Your books, I assume, are available. Will be this new one and others are available on Amazon and the regular online sites. Do you also have a personal website or social media accounts where people can follow your thoughts and what you're working on?
Yeah, my website is StephenLMoore.com. STEPHEN, middle initial L, MOORE.com.
Okay.
And you can see my previous Texas history books, Texas Ranger books. The one I did for History Channel for Texas Rising, and of course all the World War II stuff. And I'll try to post where I'm going to be. I've got the Pritzker Military Library appearance coming up this fall, and I think we've got something at the World War II Museum in February next year in New Orleans. So I will post that as those dates get closer.
Okay. That's all I have. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, just appreciate you, doing what you do to share this. Like I said, I hope people that don't necessarily go straight to Vietnam War or Special Forces books to read that, look at this, and maybe from what we heard here, have enough interest to get into it. I think the action is amazing, and what these guys did and how they had to survive, and just to bring a little recognition to them for some that, in their cases, it's long overdue.
Mm-hmm.
But again, thanks for what you do there.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for speaking with me.
It's been a pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you for listening. One of the best ways to provide feedback on this podcast is to rate it on iTunes. Please let me know if you liked it, or give me a poor rating if you didn't like this podcast, and I can use that feedback to hopefully get better. Otherwise, please follow me on Instagram at Chris Alvarez War Scholar, on YouTube under War Scholar 1945, on Twitter at War Scholar, on Facebook under War Scholar, and you can find more information on my website, warscholar.org. Please remember my name Chris does not have an H, so it's CRISALVAREZ. Thank you, and I hope you continue to enjoy this podcast.